everyone, to our newest edition of the FLINT Talks podcast. I am Zibby, the National FLINT Lead, and going to be your host today for this very special episode. And I am joined on the call with the wonderful Zoe Udy and Dave Park. I'll pass over to them in a wee second for some intros. But yes, today we're going to be unpacking the one and only Connecting Aotearoa Summit that was held last week in the Houses of Parliament in Wellington. But yeah, before we kick off with some unpacking of what was an amazing day, I'd love to hand over to Zoe to introduce herself. So yeah, over to you, Zoe.
Kia ora, Zibby. Hi, Dave, and hi, FLINT Talks listeners. My name is Zoe Udy. I am the Deputy Chair of TUANZ. Formerly, I was the Chair of the Wellington FLINT team before passing that mantle on to Zibby, and it's been passed on again, but still love to see what FLINT is up to in Wellington and around Motu. Day to day, 9 to 5, I am the e-mobility technology lead for Ampol Group. Our brand in New Zealand is Z. I help manage the e-mobility network in Australia and New Zealand.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Zoe, and thank you for joining us. She has done a couple of tech bites, so I'm sure she will be well versed in what we've got to do. Handing over to you, Dave, just a brief intro as well, and thank you so much for joining us.
Kia ora koutou, ko Dave Park toku ingoa. I'm Dave. I am based in Christchurch with the FLINT Lead team down here, and my day-to-day is head of software engineering for a company called Connect 360, working with the IAG insurance brands like AMI and State. So this whole conversation benefits everybody. So it's interesting to kind of take it from a lens of the next level out, not necessarily directly tied to the infrastructure.
But the big question, or what we're here to explore, is the Connecting Aotearoa Summit. So that is one of TUANZ's main events throughout the year. It was jam-packed. It was a full-on day, but it was awesome. And it was so cool to be an event at Parliament, the first time that we had hosted there as well. When we were at the summit, there were, as I said, many speakers, and we were unpacking a key question, which was, how do you make sure that every New Zealander has access to the best internet for their needs by 2030, which was awesome and such a really important topic to unpack. I guess just like as a high level question to you both, how did you find the conference and what were your key highlights?
I was very privileged to be co-MC of the Connecting Aotearoa Summit this year, along with Andrew Cushion, have MC'd some of our previous TUANZ conferences, although not this particular flavour, the Connecting Aotearoa Day. My main takeaway was exhaustion. I always find that big days being on all day and concentrating hard to come up with insights on the spot for some really good questions. Of course, we had great engagement. As you mentioned, Zibby, it was a full house. There was a great audience and everyone was really engaged. We were running questions through Slido on the day. But I really valued the conversations that were driven out of some of the more practical things we can do. But there was an amazing talk by Leala, who is a digital librarian based in Horowhenua, and that her lived on the ground experience of how she helps her community engage with technology and then how that's supplemented by organizations like Recycle a Device, these tangible ways that we can make a difference to individuals, whānau and community groups, I think brought everything home for me and gave us some actionable steps rather than it being high level companies to address, politicians to address, things like that.
Yeah, those talks were amazing. I was like, they were pitched right at the right time as well in the conference, because it gave us that kind of burst of energy and just their passion. I think that's what actually made my ears stand up, and it was awesome to hear some of the initiatives and the passion that they had. What about you, Dave? Was there anything else that really stood out at conference?
Yeah, no, I really couldn't agree more with what you said, Zoe. And when you think about going to a conference, especially in tech, you often kind of are talking about a product-based conference, and it tends to be about like new services or like interesting tools and that sort of thing. The focus of the day was around advocacy and inclusion and action. And I thought that by like even just on its own as a concept, that was also just really cool to be a part of. And the fact that the Slido was constantly running, constantly being checked on, and both of our MCs, yourself, Zoe, and then our other MC, did really well at actually like summarizing the concepts that were being put forward in Slido, asking some really direct questions, and the people in the room feeling that they were heard. So I thought that was just a really cool overall experience that I took away from that in terms of just how a conference can be.
Yeah, and yeah, Zoe, you did an outstanding job. Zoe had to moderate.
Thank you, Zoe.
Yeah, different panels. She was questioning the minister and putting some quite tough questions to him, but doing it in a really, empathetic and considerate way. So I thought you did awesome at doing that as well. And there were some curly questions in there from the audience, and there was lots of upvoting, and I think all of the main things that were put on that Slido were definitely posed to the speakers at the right time as well, which was awesome. What about Parliament? What did you think about hosting that event at Parliament, especially in an election year?
I think in an election year, it was so amazing to be able to be there. This is where I'm based along with you, Zibby, but being able to have Mr. Goldsmith, have the representatives we had from the Green Party, the Labour Party, and New Zealand First, to get the engagement during a sitting week when everyone is also preparing for an election. I think had we been anywhere else, we may not have had that. And as Dave, you said, and Zibby, people were constantly upvoting in the Slido. Like that engagement in an election year is so important on these topics, as the decisions that are made are going to impact that 2030 date we've set goal. That's very, very forthcoming, but it's going to impact beyond that as well. This is a really important election, and it's really important to engage with everyone's thoughts on the topic. Yeah,
absolutely. What about you, Dave? Did you enjoy being in the Beehive?
I mean, I hadn't been to the Beehive since I did a tour there when I first came to the country. And I speaking to a lot of people there, they were saying the same thing. They hadn't been there since they were a kid. And it was really fun just to be there. But also, the first thing that we noticed in the morning is that there were some bells going on, and we didn't realize, but there were some treaty readings happening at the same time as the conference. And it really made you feel like you were a live part of what was going on in the Beehive that day. So that respect that was shown to us as the people that were attending, to be able to give our voices and to be listened and to be heard and to be part of what was going on in the Beehive that day, was a real privilege.
Yeah, there is just something really special about going to a conference there or going to an event there. I've been to a few now, and it's just been in the hustle and bustle of it all. It makes you feel very connected to what you're there for. So as I mentioned, the summit was all about tackling that big question about how do we get everyone connected to the best broadband by 2030, and 2030 is not very far away at all. My question is, what do you see as the biggest roadblock? Is it the lack of funding, red tape, or is it just really hard to actually get tech and to get everybody supplied with the resources in order to achieve that goal?
Yeah, I think lack of funding and a lack of acknowledgement of the remaining people left out of connectivity from rural broadband initiatives, wireless broadband availability. There are a portion of our population who are still remote and isolated from the actual connectivity on the ground. We know that many of them now have access to Starlink, and with other low Earth orbit satellite services coming out, that may provide more competition in that space and reduce that gap even more. However, I think if you're asking me for kind of one big barrier, it's probably actually that we think of connectivity in that way at all. And what we did cover at the summit, but I'm not sure if it's thought about as often as it needs to be, is the other barriers to make use of that broadband connection. We give everyone the connection by 2030. We also need to give them the tools to get online, which means devices and funding. If funding is the barrier, if cost is the barrier to a lot of our whānau and urban environments who might not be able to afford that connection, and then knowledge and education. So education on how to use it, and education on the trust and safety as well, because I see lots of communities who don't want to engage in digital services, and we're not going to be a digitally connected society if we leave people behind.
In the afternoon, there was also the question asked directly to the parties of should we just all get a Starlink and a car battery and have it in a back of our boot as part of our emergency kit? And the answer was kind of from them like, kind of yeah, which is a bit worrying in the sense of what you're saying right there. Like, it very much is about like, okay, cool, you've got a Starlink. Who's going to hook it up? Where's the power coming from? Who's going to actually know how to connect it? And how can we make sure that it's not being taken advantage of? There's a big gap there in terms of education and safety that isn't being addressed.
I don't know if you felt the same, but there were some times when some of the speakers, or maybe the minister, and it was that feeling of we aren't addressing the fact that some people don't have those devices or people don't have access to the education. And I just think that we have to go all the way back to those issues and resolve them so that people aren't being left behind.
Yeah, some of the governmental speak that we heard sounded like, and it wasn't ever said like this outright, but it did sound like we're kind of in a good enough state. But part of this conversation is it isn't good enough. There needs to be, in addition to those things, the digital connection that is being seen as mandatory and becoming almost the same level as a basic human right as electricity.
Yeah. What we are going to do now is kind of move into one of the other big themes that were addressed at the conference, which was around some of the weather events that we've had and how do we actually keep the internet running when we have a huge crisis. So maybe that, Dave, you can kick us off with this one, but at the summit there was a lot of talk about making sure that networks do not go down, especially in those rural areas. Are we actually doing enough to protect our infrastructure, or are we just hoping for the best?
I'm going to give you such a developer answer of kind of. It depends. We know that weather events are getting more and more extreme. That's a given that we have to deal with. And companies around the world, and even in Aotearoa, we are doing better at detecting weather events, early notification, at emergency management. Like, those are regularly progressing. There is some really interesting conversations that happened from the RCG, the Remote Connectivity Group, about the amount of work that they've actually already put in place. They have done a ton to be able to give us connection around the world, or around the country. And I actually also, aside from the conference, I went to a talk recently from Canterbury Seismic, who are doing a lot of stuff about the Alpine Fault and really early detection and notification, giving people like minutes as opposed to seconds or no time at all to be able to actually have an early warning system. So it very much is get as prepared as we can and continue to progress a little bit further and a little bit further. But I don't think that we're ever going to get to a state that we can say, cool, we're done.
Yeah, definitely. And I think like that was covered in the conference. And as you say, that there's definitely a lot of people doing a lot of stuff in the background to try and improve this. But I mean, this year alone, we've already seen some big things happen when it comes to weather events and, you know, people not getting that connectivity that they require. What about you, Zoe? Have you got any sort of comments on that?
Yeah, I think kind of taking it in a different direction, but I think it needs to be layered on top, is ensuring that while we are strengthening connectivity, the use of digital tools, early warning systems, we also encourage communities to keep hold of the ways they can support each other offline. And probably if we're talking to the FLINT audience, I think it's something each of us can do, you know, rather than ensuring that we have connections and chats that are really broad, also knowing our neighbours, because in these situations we are going to have to band together. Some of the stories that we heard out of the regions who were affected, Gisborne and Cyclone Gabrielle, the maraes and the community centres were places where they were able to stand up Starlink or generators running wireless mobile broadband hubs, but you need to be connected into your local community in order to access those in an emergency and have the relationships and the trust and the knowledge of where people will be and what your plan is as a group rather than an individual. So I think we need the plans for the connectivity, and we need the plans for if the connectivity fails, because like Dave says, we can do a lot. We can inch forward, and it still might not be enough because we we just don't know what we're facing in the future.
So I'm so glad you mentioned that, Zoe, because that's something that I am so passionate about is like community. And yes, I love tech and I love learning about tech, but often like as we, adopt more technology, we see like loneliness increase, or we see we have to be connected to people around us, local initiatives. As you say, just get to know your neighbour. I mean, I've lived in this house for a good few years now, and I always make it a mission, like if someone new moves in, to introduce myself so that you know who you're living next to, and if something does happen, then you know what to do. Make those plans with your friends of what you would do in an event, and yeah, just so crucial. We've got a few more questions to go, but I guess this is a big one. We have touched on the fact that it is election year this year, and with election year, we will start to see maybe political priorities change quickly. We'll see a lot of the parties sort of come out with what their goals and ambitions are going to be. But I guess to you, Zoe, if you could make the next government agree on just one long-term plan for the tech sector, what would it be?
Okay, so I think not as a long-term plan, but as foundation to where we move next, the incoming government, the incoming coalition, really as a cross-caucus action, we need everyone to agree that digital connectivity is an essential piece of infrastructure and is a basic human right. I think if we acknowledge that and we have agreement across the political spectrum, then we can start moving forward initiatives that progress those other things we talked about: education, trust, safety, access. But without acknowledging that, access is important, is essential, it just keeps dropping down the priority list. And I can understand why, when we're faced with crises in the health sector, with fire and emergency. These are all things that with climate adaptation rapidly becoming a number 1, 2, or 3 thing that we have to address, digital connectivity might seem like a nice to have, especially because it's seen to be a small portion of the population that's still struggling in that respect. But we've already got divides in society, and I don't think we can address them until we level the playing field. And digital connectivity, inclusion, digital inclusion, these are all things we can do to help reduce that gap.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Zoe. And what about you, Dave? Sort of leading on from Zoe, any thoughts on that one?
I think that the CEO of One New Zealand said it quite well. Give us the goal and then get out of the way. It's difficult for us to be able to action anything if the budgets change every 3 years, and then the goalposts change, and then the shape changes. So if I were to make that one governmental change, it would be to look at it as that constant long-term vision, not as a set goalpost. And that's the only way we're going to be able to get their future together.
And then I'm going to take it away from the government side of things and what they should focus on. But bear in mind, we're speaking to our FLINT members here in our FLINT community. But based on what you heard at the summit, where do you think like our FLINT community members can really like step up and actually have make a bit of a difference, or support this kaupapa as well?
Go look up Digital Equity NZ. There's a collection of like Digital Equity Coalition Aotearoa, charities across the country, recycle a device, volunteer a little bit of your time, go to your local library. There are some amazing, amazing people who are supporting our whānau, and that we need to be in there and doing the same. And that's the best way that you're going to be able to support not only your community, but also all of our futures.
I think we all in our age group and younger had the privilege to grow up as digital natives. Hopefully we did all have access to those opportunities. And if we didn't, I would suggest that by virtue of being a part of FLINT, you're there now. You've got that access through university or through your jobs. And that is a privilege that we shouldn't ignore, that we are educated, that we have access and skills that others in our community don't. I think the generational divide in these things we've talked about is significant. So another one of those charities or groups that you could get involved with that I would shout out is Seniors Aotearoa, who run sessions where you can go along and help someone with a problem they might be having with their device or bills. As so many services move to digital first options, there's a huge sector of our community that needs support to still do basic things. We can also help encourage people in the face of AI and all of those scary things that are coming up. I mean, there will be differences in opinions on AI from the FLINT community, but I do think we can help bridge a gap in terms of what's really bad and what's maybe okay, you know, phishing, deep fakes, what to trust and what not to trust. Often, you know, I'm looking at some of my friends' children and they just know, they can spot scam because they've grown up with what's real and what's not. Let's try and help our parents and our grandparents and our aunties and uncles be able to spot that as well, because we might save them from getting in some really bad. And then within organizations, Dave, you mentioned recycle advice. That's something you can get involved in as an individual, but it's also something that your workplace can do to potentially donate old laptops or old leased services, leased devices as well. Recycle a device will accept those, or build relationships with the leasing companies. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, so many ways you can get involved, and I think you've both summed it up so perfectly for our members as well. As like, just a little bit, do something small, and it can make an impact. We're not asking you to change the world, but many small actions can lead to big change. Well, look, that wraps us up.
One thing, Zibby.
Yes, of course.
For that, given that we are in an election year and we've talked about that, I really think that being engaged in this election cycle, understanding what policies the different parties will have in place to address this digital divide, but also to address other issues that are important to you. This is an important year for the 2030 horizon. It's an important year for the 2050, the 2080, the 2100 year horizon. You know, voting is not just about you as the individual, it's about what you want to see for your communities and for Aotearoa as a whole. So not to get on a soapbox, but it's all linked together. And as we experience being in Parliament, that's where we get to have our voice, and we get to do that in November. So I'd really encourage everyone to make sure you're registered to vote early, enrolled to vote, and to exercise that democratic right that you have.
And as you say, learn what's been said, who's doing what, and make sure that you're putting your vote where I guess it counts and where it's going to make that difference as well. That brings us to the end. Thank you both so much. I hope you enjoyed that. It was awesome to unpack as well. I think we needed that week to decompress after such a busy schedule. As always, FLINT has got some awesome things coming up. We've got half a year left of scheduled events. I think our next event is with our Auckland team. They're doing an event on tech myth busting, so stay tuned for that. We'll send out some details around that very soon. Once again, thank you both. Thank you, listeners. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and we'll speak soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, team.